So what I've got is a short presentation, last thing before lunch, so hold your hunger. It's all getting set up out there. This has been an emotional roller coaster this morning. I mean, I don't know how you guys are feeling. I was really excited to hear about the practical, really innovative stuff you're doing with Gatorade. Got super bummed out by the privacy conversation. That kind of really, and then I have no idea how to follow the last presentation. I think that there was some really cool stuff in there. But it made me feel good because what I'm going to talk about is the use of data to do measurement. No action, no nasty targeting, no retargeting or anything like that. Just measure, that's all. So I think that's a pretty easy use case after what we've heard in the last presentation. So what I wanted to do today, I want to start with a couple of things, lots of numbers, right? I'm a numbers guy. I love what's going on here because there's lots of data, and I love eMarketer because they try and make things simple. The video landscape is getting pulled and pushed and twisted in so many directions, and I just want to illustrate a couple of points here, right? So on the left-hand side, we've got growth, or all the numbers are negative, in live TV viewership by age group, okay? And as you look at that over the last 7 years, right? 6, 7, 8 years, it's a pretty horrific story in terms of live viewership. We know this. This is one of the trends that's going on in the industry. And I'll talk about the measurement forms. But let's look on the right-hand side, because something really interesting is going on there. Because if you look at this bottom line, the total, the average time spent per day with major media is going up. So wait, live TV is going down, okay. Then we look at the TV line. The TV line is going down, okay. So what's going on? Well, it's mobile, right? So we're seeing a huge growth in mobile. So these are the kind of the pull, the push, the twist in the marketplace. And then how do we value our ads today? How do we buy ads? How do we sell ads on TV? Well, we have a measurement system. How do we buy in digital worlds? Well, we'll talk about that. We have walled gardens that have a really defined ways of valuation. And then we have a whole mishmash. So if I'm a major brand advertiser spending across platform, this stuff's going on and it's confusing the heck out of me and I can't measure it. So what I'll do in the next 10 minutes or so is I'm going to do what every good consultant does. I'm going to observe the problem. I'm not going to give you any solutions. Then over lunch we'll talk about some of the things that I will tee up, because I think there are ways to move forward, but I want to observe the problem a little bit more. So we know, and the themes we've seen in this conference, and you guys live it day in day, people are consuming content in very fluid ways. It's moving across platforms. You start on one device, you pick it up on another. You may not even turn on your mainstream TV and you're consuming content. We don't really have a mechanism to track this movement. There's some stuff I'm going to talk about that's going on at the moment. But there isn't a fully baked plan of how to measure video consumption or ad consumption or even exposure across these platforms. And that's a fundamental problem. Because we want the advertising to keep going. Like, we want to buy and sell advertising, obviously, but we want to do it cooler and cleverer ways. And yes, we might want to do some very specific targeting as well, but we need to be able to help move the advertising across the platforms. And in order to do that, we need a foundational measurement framework. And if we don't have a foundational measurement framework, I'm observing the problem. So what's going on in the industry? You know, full disclosure, I work primarily with media and entertainment companies, HBO, Sony, Disney, people like that. I don't compete with Nielsen or Comscore. I work with their data quite frequently. But they're working quite hard in this area. But let's talk about it for a second, because I'm sure some of you guys are quite familiar with these companies. I didn't mention GroupM. GroupM has a solution around kind of total content, total audience measurement, as well as an agency solution. But Nielsen are obviously the industry leader in terms of measuring traditional TV. They are in the process of rolling out TCR, total content ratings, which is an amalgam of the different pieces of data that they've been collecting for some time. It's kind of a staggered rollout. They launched it, to a few select media and entertainment clients a few months ago. Kind of put the brakes on. My suspicion is the numbers are fundamentally different than what the media clients are expecting. So that could be a bad thing, I think, for how the media clients have been valuing their ad inventory. So there's a hold there. So we've got to see what's going on with that as the year develops. Comscore at the end of this year, or towards the end of this year, are going to roll out their answer to this problem. Now, Comscore is an interesting situation because they've got, obviously, this very detailed tracking behavioral database across devices and digital landscape that's the traditional Comscore. But then they went and bought this company called Rentrack, which had a lot of set-top box data, about 22 million households. And that's data that I've played a lot with recently for my clients. It's incredibly rich. It's not a balanced sample in the sense of it's, DirecTV, Charter. It doesn't have good coverage in the major metros like San Francisco because it doesn't have Comcast, and not many people in New York City have DirecTV because you don't have dishes on your buildings. So there's some flaws, and there's always going to be a question of whether they'll have access to this data, but it's a huge, rich data set. And so from a landscape perspective, it should be really powerful. And there's certain things, as an aside, you can only do within the Rentrack Comscore data set, like understanding loyalty and how people tune into shows time after time. So there's some promise here, right? But they haven't rolled this stuff out. And then, wow, like 2 months ago, big news, just before the upfronts, Viacom, Turner, and Fox get together. A little bit like the Godfather meeting of the five families. They all get around in the room and beat up on Don Corleone. Well, they came out with a solution that they're calling OpenAP as a way to manage the inventory and the valuation of the inventory across these networks. Huge, huge move. Really interesting and something that sparked ideas for me. Nothing's fully baked, right? Nothing has really solved the issue completely yet. I'm not going to dwell too much on this because we've been talking about it all day. So advertisers are changing the way they want to operate and the way they want to communicate with specific audiences. But again, we don't have a foundational way to look at the numbers. Never mind go even further around the impression or the interaction or even the engagement. There's some emerging trends, and I'm sure our friends from Facebook will testify to this, that digital video is actually growing in affection and becoming more appealing. There's also some stats that show that when people feel like the ads have been curated for them because of their digital behaviors, they're enjoying it more, or they're feeling it's more relevant. And okay, so we've talked about this all morning in some way, shape, or form, from the privacy to the last conversation. There is a willingness on the part of consumers, particularly young consumers, to allow their information to be used in a certain way. There's a ton of roadblocks here potentially. There's a ton of issues, but there are businesses like Google and Facebook, which we are all comfortable, trusting to some extent with our data. I think that's a good trend to build upon. So if only we could use this in a way that would help advertisers measure their audience more precisely as we transition through these different ways and screens. Because really, digital and linear tools, they should be the same. There should be a way to do this. And we shouldn't have this problem. And there is a need to figure out how to interact with the walled gardens of Google and Facebook. And I think there's an incentive really for the whole industry to work together from a measurement perspective. So what's holding us back? Why has Nielsen, a $5 billion company or something like that, with thousands of people, not cracked this code? Why does Comscore, still have issues? Why does the agency landscape haven't cracked the code? They have a specific set of challenges where they're both the buyer and the executor and the kind of the owner of some of the purse strings. So they're in a difficult position from a measurement perspective. They need an independent body to help do it. And then the brand marketers and the brand advertisers, they haven't been able to crack this code individually. I think there's two really, really big problems. I think the first one is that we, in this modern, technologically mobile, multi-device landscape, don't understand identity. You just mentioned direct marketing. Back in the day, if I wanted to know everybody in the United States and send them a piece of mail, I could probably get 99% of them, maybe 98% of them. Maybe have to do some current resident, but it was a known universe. That gave us a referential database of households that we could use for one-to-one targeting and all kinds of things. We don't have a referential database of identity that we could use for measurement purposes. No one's collecting device IDs in a way that allows us to check what they're viewing and consuming. The panel sizes aren't big enough across Comscore and Nielsen. The solution, I believe, or part of the solution, lies in creating a way to identify individuals anonymously, because again, we're measuring, we're not targeting, and track their consumption of video in a way that will give us a currency. This is, I think, fundamentally a technology problem, not a research problem. And part of the reason I think we're in the situation today where we've got incredibly successful technology companies like Google, like Facebook, who have essentially created their own measurement frameworks, is because they started with the technology infrastructure and the data at the core of what they do, and then built the measurement frameworks. Whereas companies like Nielsen, who are really a research company, right? They want to pretend they're in technology, they are a research company, and I don't think it's part of their core skill set. So I think part of the holdback here is that the solution is a technology one. We've obviously got to build the measurement framework in a privacy-compliant and consumer-friendly way. There's got to be a level of technological adoption and agreement across agencies, brands, potentially the walled gardens of how we measure and track and tag behaviors across devices. But it's time for that meeting of the 5 families on a really big scale. It's time for the meeting of the agency leaderships and the major brand marketers and the major digital players in a way that we could push this forward. Every conference I go to with my clients, like NBC and Sony and HBO and Turner and CNN, everyone's bitching about Nielsen. Everyone's bitching about the rating situation. Everyone's complaining against this problem. It's time to maybe stop complaining about them not doing it and start to sit together in the rooms just like Viacom, Turner, and Fox have been willing to do. So, to me, the solution is an open source currency. The currency is data. We've heard it throughout this conversation today. It needs to be shared in a privacy-compliant way where we can create a flexible measurement metric that gives us the power of the multi-channel, multi-device landscape we're working in. So I was doing my research for this, and I can talk happily for hours, and I've got 1 minute left, so I'll keep it short. But I found a really cool article in Ad Age, and it was really straightforward, and it was observing the problem, and it was from Jane Clark, who runs a group called the Innovative Media Measurement Coalition. And she just said there's 8 things that any solution needs to have. And I think some of them are a little bit nerdy, like number 2, you've got to meet the MRC accountability standards. Fair enough. And then you've got to be able to measure households and individuals. You have to look at the notion of out-of-home and in-home as well, because right now, as I'm sure you're all aware, everything's in-home based, right? And we're not consuming media just like that. We're consuming media on the go. We know that panels aren't enough. We have the usage data. We have to provide some level of transparency. And then the super geeky part about metadata, there's obviously some fundamental need to require metadata. But I would encourage you guys to search out this article on Ad Age. There's also a really phenomenally good eMarketer article that's behind their paywall. So if you're an eMarketer subscriber, you gotta get access to it. But it really lays out the measurement landscape. But to me, this is about an opportunity for collaboration and cooperation. And looking at this as a technology, an identity problem, identity of who we want to measure, not a research problem.